Hey y'all, welcome back again to another episode of Healthy Design. Thought we'd continue on with our discussion for training. I'm trying to give you guys some information, some big principles that you can use and apply. That way you could kind of design your own thing and try to make it most efficient and also the easiest way to help you reach your goals. So I thought the principles we'd kind of discuss today are the SAID principle, specific adaptation to imposed demand, individuality, progression, and then the fourth one is reversibility. That's real quick and easy. If you train for something and then you stop training for it, you're going to lose those results. And then I think next week we can kind of move into Eric Helms' pyramid for like strength and power. At the base, he has adherence. Next level up's volume, intensity, frequency, then progression, exercise selection, rest periods, and then tempo. And I think that pyramid's good because a lot of times people are more concerned about the exercise selection, how fast they should do something, how long they should rest, rather than having those big fundamental blocks at the bottom. And so I think even before kind of getting into those, and there is some overlap, but I think the SAID principle, individuality, and progression are the key things. And so with the SAID principle, just make sure the training that you're doing is leading you towards your goal. So there's often this thing referred to as the interference effect. For elite athletes, I think it's a very important thing. For normal people like us, it's probably not too important. But let's say your goal is to build as much strength as possible. And so then you need to train for that. If you're training for that by running marathons, opposite end of the spectrum, that's not going to lead to very good strength gains, or not as good as they could be. Now, if you're not an elite athlete, you're not trying to be the world's best power lifter or the world's best marathoner, and you want to run some distance events, even up to marathon, just for fun, and you want to be strong, you can train for both things, but you won't be as good at marathon running as you could be or gain as much strength as you could if you just focused on that. But if your goal is not to be the very best at either one of those things that you can be, and to be somewhat good at both, you can do that no problem. So, I like sprinting. So I want to be able to go really, really fast, but for a really short period of time. So continuing to, run, say, a 60-meter sprint. I'm not going to run one and then just rest like a minute or two and run another. Because for that second one, I'm going to be running a lot slower than I was for the first one. So I want to make sure I run that first one, rest a long time, make sure I'm well recovered, then run that second rep so that I'm able to keep my speed up there. And then once my speed starts dropping down, it's time to finish that workout, not to keep running. Now, if I'm trying to be able to run more and more repeats at 60, maybe I want to run either longer, maybe not take quite as long of a rest break. Maybe I want to do a few reps just so I can stay kind of around that top and not at the top. Sorry, pollen's in the air, so I've got some allergies. But if I want to just go fast, I want to make sure I'm well rested, and then as soon as the times are dropping, it's time to finish that workout. So it all depends on what your goal is. We talked a little bit last week with Alyssa. Part of her goal is to build muscle and to build strength, and she was doing some of the classes. They're not the best way to build muscle and to build strength. If you've never done any training whatsoever before, then that's going to be a new stimulus, and it will help you build some muscle and some strength. So does that mean those classes aren't good? It means they're not the best at building muscle and strength, but if you're trying to get your heart rate up, if you're trying to work hard, get a lot of work in that time period, they're really good for that. Sorry about that. Had a sneezing spell. Gotta love this time of year with all the pollen and your car being yellow. So anyway, we want to do things, we want to train in a way that's going to help lead to the specific adaptations we want. So again, let's say you're wanting more endurance, then you're not going to do sets of like 2-3 reps because that's going to focus more on strength. If you're trying to build maximum strength, then sets of 2, 3, 4, 5, pretty good. Sets of 30, not so good. If you're trying to build muscle, then we can build muscle using sets of 5 up to 30. And so then we can move kind of into individuality. So let's take that example. The main thing or the main goal is to build muscle. Well, now you get to play with things. Research tells us that there's just as good results for sets of 5 versus sets of 30, as long as the last few reps are difficult. So as you move into that higher rep range, we definitely need to be getting really close to hitting muscular failure by the end of the set. If, let's say, like you're doing weight for 5 reps, you could have done 6 reps with, maybe the first 1 or 2 are easy, but each one after that's kind of difficult, and that's enough to give you the stimulus. Whereas if you're doing a set of 30, probably the first 25 or so are pretty easy, and then finally maybe even 26, 27 are easy, and then finally those last few are the ones that are getting hard and giving that stimulus. So that's kind of why that failure part's important. But then maybe what you'll probably find is that you're going to do well for certain muscle groups or certain exercises in like a 5 to 10 range. But then when you try that for a different group, it doesn't work so well. You do better there, 15 to 20. So that's where individuality comes in, to see kind of what works well for you, what you respond the best to. The science, the research, it can give us kind of a starting point, but it can't tell us everything there is to know about us because we weren't part of that study. And then we need to know like who was part of the study, how long they've trained, different things like that. All that could play a part in it, because if it's a bunch of 18 to 22-year-old males, well, I'm not 18 to 22, so their results may not apply to me. If you're a female, you're definitely not an 18 to 22-year-old male, so it might not apply to you too. But that's what kind of research is. It gives us a kind of a starting point, and then we can experiment on ourselves to figure out what works best for us. I've shared some things before with different workouts, like for triceps. When I was younger, I could do heavier weights, and so like lower reps seem to work just fine. Now that seems to irritate my elbows a little bit, and so I feel like I get better results going higher reps because I definitely feel the muscle working, and I don't get any irritation to the elbows. So things might change too in that individuality just as you progress. What worked at one point may not be the best thing now, and so just keep that in mind. That individuality can really kind of show its head in a lot of different ways, but it's something to keep in mind. So don't try to force yourself to fit and be like somebody else. What works great for this person is what works great for that person. Maybe it'll work great for you, maybe not. So just play with things. Don't get too caught up in I have to find this one ideal way to do it. There's not just one ideal way. And even if there was, that ideal way is going to change over time. So you got to be able to adapt and figure that out over time. Progression. So progression's key, but it gets misconstrued a lot. And so you'll have people talk about progressive overload. And so then people will take it to the extreme of, well, you've got to add weight to the bar every single workout or add a rep every single workout. And that's not the case. Again, the research seems to suggest that we don't have to get necessarily all the way to muscular failure, especially if we're like say in an 8 to 12 rep range. If we're like say 2, maybe even 3 reps short of failure, that's enough of a stimulus for us to grow. That's the example we're kind of using. So as long as we're within that 3 reps short of failure, we're okay. So let's take an example. Let's say we're doing 100 pounds on the bench press, and it's let's say, it's a 12 rep max. And so the first workout, we do like 3 sets of 10. So we have 2 reps in reserve that first set, maybe 1 the second set, and then on the third, because of fatigue, that might actually be failure. So if we were fresh, we could have gotten 12 reps, but now that we've got that fatigue, we only got 10. Next workout, you do the same thing, 3 sets of 10. The first one, probably have like 3 reps in reserve, 2 to 3, 1 to 2, kind of failure, maybe 1 in the tank. And so, you might keep doing that for a while. And then finally, when you're hitting it, you're like getting 10 reps real easy for all of them. And so at that point, maybe that last set, even with the fatigue, it's like a, 3, 4 reps in reserve. Maybe we're not getting the stimulus anymore. So now we add weight and go back to 3 sets of 10. So that's one of the ways it can play out. one of the ways I like to do things, just because I found it works well for me, so maybe it'll work well for you, is I like getting kind of close to failure. So right now for my strength kind of power workouts, I'm on the first set, I'm getting close to failure. Maybe I have 1 rep left. Definitely don't have 2. So I might be at failure or have 1. And then I'll rest for a while. And on that second set, I normally can't hit the same rep number, but I'm at failure. Like even if I tried, I would get a partial rep, but I wouldn't get a full rep. And that works well for me. I really like that struggle at the end. I like that grind. So that works well for me. For other people, it might not. And I tend to drop off pretty quick too. I don't know. It's just the way I'm made. Some people can go to failure, rest a little bit, and they can hit that same, rep number with the same weight again. So just kind of see how you're made. But I know I'm getting a stimulus because I'm close enough to that failure point with each set. And then if my reps get up there, so like say I did 8 and I get up to doing 12, I'm going to increase the reps. And that's on that first set. And then I'll let that second set be whatever it is. So that's another way to kind of progress and do things. But, sometimes I can add weight from workout to workout. Other times it takes a couple weeks before I get to that point. But there's still enough of a stimulus there for muscle growth. In that previous example, it could have taken, 4 workouts or more. But then you finally got to the point where that wasn't a stimulus anymore. But for those 4 workouts, it still was. Then you got to finally add weight. So just keep that in mind. It's progression over time. It's not every single workout. If you can beat the logbook and everything, that's great. But sometimes that push to beat the logbook every time leads to kind of some slight changes in form. Like maybe you don't do the same rep completely. You stop a little short just to make it easier. Or you really start kind of torquing and doing things wrong. And so, it could lead to injury if you're doing things like that, not keeping the same form. So, we want to make sure we're doing, good form, doing things the right way and progressing slowly over time. Just keep that progression consistent over time and you'll get a lot of results. We don't have to get this huge jump from session to session. So that's really what that progression part's all about. That's what progressive overload is. There's the old story of Milo and the bull, and he kept picking the bull up every day. And so as the bull gained weight, he gained strength. And so everybody's like, oh, you got to add weight every time. But again, you don't have to add weight every time. As long as you're within, like say 2 to 3 reps in reserve, 2 to 3 reps in the tank before hitting failure, if you're pushing that hard, you're going to get some benefits. Individuality could come in there. Maybe you don't get quite the same benefits stopping there as you would if you went a little closer to failure. Maybe you get better results that way because you're not as fatigued. It could play out a lot of different ways based on you and that individuality part we talked about earlier. So that gives you guys at least some examples for this. Hopefully it helps you out. I'm trying to give you information again so you can kind of design your own training and figure out what you enjoy and then kind of how to get some results out of it. So, but that actually what you enjoy is a really big thing. It could be the world's best training program, but if you can't stand it and you hate it, how often are you going to do it? So probably not ever, and then it's not going to work so well. So even if it's not the world's best training program, but it's one you enjoy, and you can do it consistently over time, progressing over time, you're probably going to get a lot better results that way. So that's it for today. Next week, we'll talk about the strength power pyramid and go over those things. I think that'll help you guys out as well. And then we'll move on to some other topics after that. All right, guys. Sorry for the nose and the pollen messing things up, but hopefully you understand. See you next week.